Good morning, everybody. It's April 23rd. I'm Charlie Fink. I'm here with Ted Schilowitz, Futurist at Viacom's Paramount Pictures, and it's This Week in XR. We have an exciting guest. Our friend Kyle Jackson from Talespin will be joining us in 15 minutes. But first, Ted and I are going to go over some of the top stories in the news this week. Ted, our friends at Holoride, who had that amazing demo at CES when it was last in the reel. They put you in the back of an Audi wearing a VR headset, and the experience, I guess, somehow syncs up with the car. Mm-hmm. And these guys have raised $12 million.
Yeah, not bad, right? And I think, Charlie, you know, we're getting to a point in our podcast now. We've been doing this long enough that we can refer back to generalized themes and things that we know that we need to keep talking about. And this extrapolation of theme park entertainment.
I was just going to say that theme park ride in your car.
Yep, is a continuing running theme that we are constantly seeing come back. Humans want to be entertained in this way, right? And we're finding all kinds of use cases for what do we take new pieces and parts of well-known pieces of the industry and tropes and glue them together in an interesting way, and you create a new ride experience. And they can raise capital and have a business model that might make sense someday.
Well, you know what Rosedale says? Because of automation and AI displacing billions of workers, we're going to spend the rest of our time entertaining each other.
Right, exactly.
And so from the ridiculous to the sublime, or is it the sublime to the ridiculous? Verbella, our friends at Verbella, Alex Howland's company, that's part of eXp Realty, which is one of the few, I guess, XR companies that's actually publicly traded. They have launched a WebXR experience, way better than Mozilla Hubs. WebXR, for those of you who are listening, I assume if you're listening to this podcast, you know it's a web.
A little bit about WebXR. Yeah.
So you go there on your browser, any device, any browser, and if you have VR, of course, you can hit the VR upgrade button and see the stereoscopic version. So Verbella, great company, great collaboration platform, does well with large conferences of a couple thousand people, which almost nobody else basically can handle. But they realize it's a big app. It's a big download. It's and so corporate IT kind of exists to prevent that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it takes a million years for them to get approval to be on corporate machines, and most people don't even want to go through that if it's just a department thing.
Right.
So they created Frame. They've got whiteboarding in there. You can bring in 3D objects. As I said, I don't think Spatial is going to be quaking in their boots this week, but it is a legit competitor from a well-funded, forward-looking company with some really talented executives. So I think something could be happening. There are 38 or 40 by my count remote collaboration sites.
40 now. Wow, that's interesting.
In a way, it's sort of like, oh my God, we need another one of these. But because it's Verbella and because it's WebXR, I think there's a place for this.
Right. And even though I know when we even say this word, it's going to open up a Pandora's box that we cannot get out of. But this is broadly of how we refer to continuing the dance around the metaverse, right? This is another company that we both respect and that's doing interesting things, continuing to grow, starting to make their next play in the metaverse, which requires almost no interface, challenges and downloads and apps and things. It's just launch a browser and come into our version of the metaverse. And this is a very popular theme, to the point of, like you said, 30 or 40 companies all trying to figure out how do they fit into this, right?
Well, that's a great segue, and this will be our last topic before we go to Kyle, but it's a rabbit hole, as I said in our prep. And I'm going back to last week and the $1 billion investment that follows the earlier $1 billion investment into Epic Games, the maker of Unreal Engine and Fortnite and a number of other PC and console games. A very successful company. Tencent owns a considerable amount of the company, probably, I would guess at this point, 25 or 30%.
Yeah, significant amount.
Company valued at I don't know, $50 billion. The significant thing here, though, is that they said this tranche of investment is not about games.
Right.
It's about building a metaverse. And coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, at the same time, they launched a Metahuman Creator, which creates a very sophisticated avatar of a human, like a Ready Player One level human. And of course, that's being driven by their fantastic game engine, which is very powerful. It's used in virtual production and, for lots of AAA games and making AAA games, including Fortnite. So with the thing about Metahuman Creator is if you're going to have a metaverse, right, that means a world, a connected series of virtual worlds where you can pass frictionlessly, with a web browser, if you will. And when you go into these simulation and these spatial rooms or places, you have an avatar that you carry with you, right? And your avatar has your blockchain currency, and it's got your different avatars or costumes, if you will, and you have one identity, right? The system recognizes that you're Ted, right, no matter how you're dressed. You can be an amoeba, but they know that you're Ted.
That's correct.
And Ted the amoeba still has access to a smartphone. He still has access to whatever applications he's carrying with him that he can deploy in the appropriate simulations. So it seems to me that the really big play here is to own that avatar, own that metahuman, and own that backpack.
Right. So yeah, what you're referring to is the very, very strong future of the digital identity, which from the minute we all got, public IP addresses, and we all got a thing called an email address. Our first ones were probably at AOL or a CompuServe back in the day. And, now a lot of people have Gmail addresses or their corporate email.
My first one was an eWorld address.
eWorld, even better. Mine was AOL. Mine was my last name at AOL.com. And we just had all those CDs that would ship, and we'd use them as coasters for our house. But when that, we're going back generations now, right, of a digital identity that is so linked to us. And it's just been a kind of a text-based 2D light graphics layer identity. And now, because of gaming culture, those digital identities have transferred from just text and light graphics into extraordinarily sophisticated graphic digital identity. So the next logical step is to start to dive into what Epic is studying. Where do we go from here with more and more sophisticated graphic attempts at making people feel like it's really happening to them? And that is a big part of what we are studying every day, what you're doing with your class.
Oculus is going after this too.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think they're dummies here. They too understand the value of the avatar as this sort of, I guess, spatial browser.
Yeah, the last time you and I gathered at one of the Oculus Connects, Michael Abrash was on stage showing their research work at photorealistic avatars that were created, and the headsets, they built some modifications so that it would read and generate the lips and face movement of the avatar. And it was totally real. Like, it looked like that was you inside VR, and you were essentially controlling it while wearing the clunky headset. So you didn't have to see the clunky headset. Now with Epic taking that to scale and making it much more accessible to a lot of people, and companies like Roblox and Sony with their Dreams platform, and every other.
Imagine them hooking Metaverse Creator into the game engine so that anybody creating a VR experience is immediately compatible with Metahuman.
Correct. Right. And we'll be at a day when we will remember, we used to use those funky cartoon avatars all the time in VR. And then, guys like you, guys like me, we actually have a high-res avatar because we're in that group that had to figure that out when it was expensive and exotic. But we also knew that at some point, everybody will have access to this. Like, you'll be able to build your own avatar, and that will be your email address, quote unquote, for the future, right? Is like your avatar shows up and boom, there you are. And you're in that world. And that's the world we're in.
Well, I said it was a rabbit hole, and we could do a whole show on metaverses, and maybe we should. I wanted to get to, and I won't, I'm just going to mention it. that land in Decentraland and Somnamum space is going for $500,000.
Yeah.
And it's clearly part of the NFT craze and, this idea of blockchain ownership and this whole class of Bitcoin billionaires who are otherwise invisible.
Correct. Right.
And they're from all over the world.
Right. Yeah.
So I really hurting my head trying to understand that, because that is a big crazy bet. That they will, Somnamum space or Decentraland will matter.
Right.
And I mean, these are good companies with interesting products.
Yeah.
But the play that they're going for, and more importantly, the play that these other guys are paying to be part of, seems to be really expanding. So who's in there?
Yeah.
What the heck? So anyway, we won't go there today. I want to get to our friend Kyle Jackson, whose company Talespin is in the simulation business. They create business simulations.
Right.
So I'm interested to hear what he has to say.
Me too.
Our guest today is Kyle Jackson, a serial entrepreneur, old friend of Ted's, CEO and founder of Talespin, a new VR company that does corporate training and VR education. Kyle, welcome to the show. Great to see you this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you guys.
Yeah. Kyle and I go way back. He and I are cut from the same DNA cloth, as we would say, always experimenting, exploring, and trying new things. And he has found extraordinary success with Charlie. What you and I talk about a lot is one of the really robust and powerful verticals in simulation use case, which is training and education for light, heavy industry, medical, all these different pieces of industry that require a better tool than a traditional screen to start to learn how to do things. And that's what Kyle has been very successful at over the past couple of years now.
Yeah, Kyle, sorry, go ahead.
I say, it's been an interesting journey. I like to call it infinitely curious, Ted.
Yes, you and I are infinitely curious.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well put. I was going to ask, most of your other startups were focused on entertainment and media technology. So why VR? How did this happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically, I've going back to the infinitely curious. I mean, basically, been on the kind of bleeding edge of new mediums and tech, for that entire career. And so, I just recently realized what I think I'm really good at is workflow and bridging the gap and plumbing and other things that are required as these things break and come together. And so that was about 15 years of that. That led into being heavily involved in virtual production, computer vision, machine learning in like 2011, 2012. And got really, really passionate about, the idea of kind of changing the production cycle. And obviously now we're seeing that come to really full fruition. But the other thing that happened on that journey and that exploration was I just started to see a lot of tech, both computer vision and machine learning and AI tech, that I just got kind of really interested in what was going on in the more macro sense, in terms of the workforce, the workplace, how it was going to be disruptive to products and services that companies were building. I just had this kind of like this itch, in the back of, the hair standing up in the back of your neck going, there's something that's pretty, it's a tidal wave coming here, and there's not a lot of people talking about what we're going to do to offset it. And people are going to need to, obviously be repositioned or reskilled now, as we like to say, opposite these types of waves. And I just kept kind of thinking more and more about that. Meanwhile, on the day job, a whole bunch of companies got funded, had a ton of cash. They needed pipelines fixed, and in the VR space, they needed pipelines created and fixed. And so I was just getting dragged deeper and deeper into it. And eventually the two worlds kind of, that suspicion or that itch and now what had been a couple of years deep in VR came together, and it was, okay, maybe there's something here.
Yeah.
Maybe what we should do is use this new medium and kind of the deep background and fixing these kind of problems when, emerging mediums and tech and put it to use to build a new foundation for how people move forward.
Yeah, I would say, Kyle, that see if you agree with this, that both you, me, and Charlie all found that let's call it third or fourth wave of VR all right about the same time, right? Kind
Yeah.
of in that early DK1 phase, and we were all kind of at different points of our career, and this moment of, okay, this is an interesting new device that lives on the back of, for me, was like theme park and simulation entertainment, and for you was workflow and pipeline, and for Charlie was both his theme park history and his education and media background in terms of getting the word out. And I think the three of us all kind of played this interesting role. We all took little different chunks of it and we kind of ran with it. And here we are today in 2021.
Sure, you two guys chose the path of how do you make money, and Charlie chose the path of how do you do a lot of work and not
make any money. Right?
So I'm hanging around with Ted, Kyle, just hoping by rubbing up against him, some of it gets on me.
It's a good strategy. It's a good strategy. I've played that strategy once before with Ted, and it worked pretty well. So.
So one thing people might be wondering, you know, we're kind of, I think, cutting ahead a little bit. Can you tell us what the products that Talespin makes are and how you're getting them out there to the customers?
Yeah, so we've actually been doing a lot of updating in terms of like how we're educating the customer now, and also just in the product maturity. So we actually consider ourselves a skills mobility company is now how we think about things. And what that really means is that you're using this technology to more rapidly transfer skills and to better assess and measure them. And so between those two ends, you actually get kind of mobility, which means that I can take my credential and I can give it to somebody else and show them that I actually know this thing, or I can have a better preview of skills that I might be interested in, exploring. So the actual products are broken into soft skills and hard skills. We have kind of two parts of the platform, and then underneath that sits a whole kind of we like to think about it as kind of like GPS for career and skill navigation. But on the soft skill side, it's this what Charlie we originally got connected on, which was having simulated conversation with virtual humans. So we basically build a whole pipeline and then a set of authoring tools internally that we've been using for the last couple of years to build these soft skills simulations for things like sales and management, and even just empathy, DEI, all the topics that are becoming really critical to like successfully navigate business. And then on the other side is hard skills, which is your more traditional process and object-based learning. And those are, we focused initially kind of in insurance and telecom, and then more recently being brought out into the skilled trades as well. And that looks a lot like what you've probably seen, where it's teaching somebody how to install a piece of equipment or maintain a site or investigate a problem area at an oil rig or something like that. Like it's all those types of use cases.
And the advantage you discovered is that with a tool that allows a spatial environment to come to life at scale and at a very cost-effective way, you can essentially simulate things that would only happen in the real world, where training is expensive and sometimes exotic and sometimes impossible, right? Like getting people out to an oil rig, getting people out to a dangerous chemical environment, or it's just things with issues in the real world that you have to get them into hazmat suits and you have to get them prepped and trained. The expense of that can be extraordinary, right?
Yeah.
And the scale is really limited. And you basically crack that code with VR by basically building what I refer to as theme park style simulations of things that you can put into headsets and then send out to people all over the planet as needed to train them, right?
Yeah, that was one huge side of the problem that was being solved. The other, which was the one that was like kind of more interesting to me up front, was that if you think about the workforce transformation that's about to happen, or we're in the middle of now,
we're happening.
I always like to say there was just a math problem, which means that we had to transition a whole, roughly 1 billion people plus into new roles. And if you used e-learning and video and web-based modalities, like there was a known time that was going to take, and we knew there was a known efficacy, and those two things are actually incompatible with the actual problem we have to solve.
Right.
Like it doesn't balance. And so the reason I got so passionate about it is like, okay, well, what's the law of acceleration that happens with this medium? And that got interesting, because that's somewhere between 4 and 10 times. That's, I mean, basically we can get somebody up to proficiency, 4 to 10 times faster than any of those means. And generally what we've seen is not only do they get up to speed that much quicker, but they're retaining the information, 3 to 5 times as long.
Yeah, because the spatial memory is actually more real than a two-dimensional video chat memory, especially in this last year. You've probably seen a massive accelerator to the need for.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Another, technology business that must have been accelerated due to the pandemic, and in the new normal, probably a lot of that demand will remain.
Yeah, I think that second part is the piece that we're feeling. So there's there's platforms like Spatial and other collaboration platforms that felt it immediately, right? Because they had a product in market and it was flexible enough to do a whole bunch of things, and therefore there's people started using it. Where what we do is usually solving more specific, problems that require, a level of, experts to be involved and curriculum to be created. But what did happen is we went from being a frontier tech play where every call I was on was pitching the notion of this as some art of the possible to the opposite.
We need it right now. Yeah.
Some foundation.
How do we engage now? Yeah.
Well, we're going to be back in the office in 2021, and we don't want to go back to the way we were doing things. So we need to start now.
Right.
So fourth quarter was our biggest quarter in 5 years of company history. And then the top of this year has just been, the same, just crushing. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to hear that. One last topic, and again, I just want to drill down. You talked about hard skills and soft skills. You've got kind of a, production studio that you can ramp up, sounds like pretty easily to make these experiences. So, what is the studio? What are the movies? Ted referred to them as little teaching theme park experiences. So what are the experiences, both, can you give me an example in the hard area and also for soft skills? I think people would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, so the soft skills area has been largely down leadership and sales themes. We're working with a couple of the really, the world's biggest consultancies, and then a couple of the world's biggest technology companies that have large communities, because their software is focused on, a large pool of end users that do a certain, sales job or a customer service job that requires soft skills. And so those use cases, range from things around bias and difficult conversations and even just selling plays. A really fascinating thing actually is what does selling look like in the later this year? I mean, these sales forces had different, everybody had different sales cultures, but largely a lot of them were in person and on planes and also not dealing with a lot of the difficult conversations that are now potentially have to be confronted. And so there's a whole what's the future of selling look like track that we're building with a partner. On the hard skills side, we really focused a lot on telecom, because telecom and insurance originally, because they're both sectors that were going through tremendous change at the hands of technology, probably about 3 to 5 years before a lot of other sectors were going to, and the demographics there were really already skewed towards this kind of workforce transformation that's now happening more broadly. So been in those for a few years. And so in insurance, it's essentially teaching people investigation skills, because what's happening is, a lot of the work that used to be frontline work is now being moved to call centers or backline work, because the sensors on the front end are so good. People can now take this and do a LiDAR scan of their home, and their insurance claims agent is handling it all in a call center. But those people in the call center have never been frontline workers. So they don't actually have the experience to know how to deal with that situation. So they're now learning that in simulation instead of actually having been on the job for 5 years or whatever.
So meanwhile, you've spent the past 5 years becoming an expert in industrial workflows.
Because it's
understand them in order to create these kinds of super specific modules.
Yeah. Well, and I think the background, so one of the things that Ted and I spent a lot of time in was, as the movie studios were kind of figuring out how to launch video on demand networks and modernize from physical distribution to digital distribution, it was a really complex supply chain problem. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of that work to what I'm seeing in all these major organizations now. Obviously, different tasks being done at the end, but similar problems just in terms of both culture and technology and workflows, information flows, communication flows. So it feels very similar to about from 2006 to 2011 when we were doing that for all the movie studios.
Kyle, I think you'll like this perspective on stuff, because just in the past couple of weeks, I've used this well-worn joke way too many times, but it's become oddly appropriate. Is all those areas that you're talking about how do you modernize a sales transaction, an e-commerce transaction, a insurance modification transaction, all these things. There are so many things that I'm touching where they ask me to hop onto some sort of web interface. And the first thing I say is, looks like 1994 just called and they would like that web interface back.
Oh man, I've got a book of those you'd love to see.
Right, and what you're doing is sort of realizing that we need a more modern, more appropriate tool for what Charlie and I have talked about a lot, this virtual metaphor that we are all in now. Things that have happened, just like all the things you just referred to, are things that would only happen with practical things, someone getting into a car, going to a site and figuring something out. And what you have tapped a vein on is that this can be used in modern simulation and modern WebKit and modern visualization and modern tools that have things like LiDAR and advanced cameras and so forth and so on. So like I said, you really tapped into a world that the world is coming and realizing that they need people like you that are doing it. So
well, and I think the other piece is there's still going to be a transition period, which is something we saw before too, right? Where you go from one medium to another, you have to find this kind of on-ramp path.
Yeah, there's that uncomfortable moment where people don't quite grasp it yet, and then everybody starts to grasp it.
Yeah,
kind of what's
and I think we're right in the middle of that now, because now it's like a foregone conclusion, and people are stuck with their 1994 interface, and they're wanting their 2022 interface.
Correct.
And they got problems they have to solve tomorrow. And they're like, and it's this tricky middle that you have to kind of get into the mud and help them with.
Do you want to, just as we kind of wrap things up, maybe do you want to maybe mention the website so people can find where they learn more about you and a little bit of the size of your company, the trajectory of your company?
Yeah. So we're on the web. We're just www.talespin.com, TALE. The whole notion of the name of the company is that we were going to be swimming into such a disruptive time that you had to be comfortable taking it head on. And so the idea of a tailspin is obviously something that's usually quite negative. And we flipped it on its head and threw it in people's face. And every single person we came across for a couple of years asked us, why in the heck would you do that? And they said, because this is a period where you have to be curious and brave, or you're not gonna thrive.
It's funny because that name always made perfect sense to me.
That sounds great. Charlie, so you're in the rare air, man.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for hanging out with us this morning. That's our show, everybody. Appreciate you listening today. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kyle.